Hey, Linda. And Jane from Massachusetts, Brutus, Michigan. No, Joanne, it's not your fault trying to catch this live. So I just posted on Facebook actually that I had no internet. I've been struggling over here. This is is not my home, and I was struggling over here for about 15 minutes, and nothing was working. Rebooting everything, turning off the computer, everything else. So I'm not even sure it went out because I had no internet, and I posted on my phone, I have no internet. I'm doing the best I can. And as that is struggling to post, all of a sudden the whole thing comes up. So I'm late this time, not for my own fault, and I have no idea why it wasn't working before, but here I am. So sorry about that. Yay for technology, I guess. Maybe it was just mad at me. I don't know. They are doing work around here, so maybe that was part of it. Anyway, lots of you are here. I'm sorry I'm so late. So Stockbridge. So two of you from Stockbridge, like 7 apart from each other. We got Hadley, Mass. Wareham, Mass. What are you guys all bored up there? Bloomington, Indiana. Of course. Whoever just said that, of course. We've got windstorms here. Yeah, right. I'm sure that's it. All right. So let me get right into some of the questions you asked because I know you were waiting 10 minutes here. A lot of people asked about the injection on October 31st of money into U.S. banks and whether that was an issue for concern. It appears, coming at the end of the month as it did, that it was a very short term, as in a 24-hour loan to banks to make them more liquid than they were so they could meet end of the month obligations. You look for that in the middle of the month or some other time to be an issue of concern. At the end of the month, it is unlikely to be a concern from everything I read, but I don't think I spend a lot of time worrying about that now. Although that being said, there are a number of ways in which the economy looks increasingly weak. And, a lot of people watching that. I don't talk a lot about that because one of the things you learn as a historian is that the way people think about the economy has an awful lot to do with how it behaves. And I'm always really leery of saying, oh, be concerned, or, oh, don't be concerned, because not to put too fine a point on it, you 1,000% should not take advice about the economy from a historian. So I'm always trying not to weight things outside. Sound like Mike Johnson here, outside of my lane. But people are looking, and I write about this sometimes, looking at features like how uncertain the economy is right now because nobody knows what Trump's going to do one minute to the next, about how hard it is to invest because of that, and so on. So it's not like you had this booming economy under President Joe Biden that The Economist called the envy of the world, and we just don't have that anymore. So there's a number of reasons people are nervous. The government shutdown, I'll talk more about. The dramatic slowdown in jobs hiring, and uncertainty, and many different factors like that. But the injection of the money into the banks at the end of the month is not something wildly unusual at a time when the Fed has been working on a number of different federal financial things. All right. So lots of people ask the question, which I think is an excellent one. Why on earth aren't state forces or local law enforcement officers arresting the immigration and customs enforcement officers who appear to be assaulting American citizens or other people in the streets? And the answer to that is, first of all, that the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution gives federal officers, because remember, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers are federal officers, the power to do things that the state cannot then stand in the way of. That's not to say that a federal officer can't face state charges if the officer breaks the law outside of what that officer has been charged with doing by the federal government. But it's really hard to nail that down. So what we're starting to see now are a number of lawsuits that are starting to run through the courts that are exposing a lot of what these federal officers have been doing and what conditions are like inside detention centers like Broadview outside of Chicago. And that's going to break a lot of stuff open. What we're seeing already is truly horrific. The videos are coming out as court testimonies, so you can't really challenge that they are real. And hearing from people who are involved both in the demonstrations but also inside facilities is really, really horrific stuff. And for the record, I have not written about that. I write these letters every night. I've not written about that except really in passing for a long time now. And that's not because I'm not paying attention to it. It's because I'm collecting all the stories I can to try and make sense of it, because we have different things happening in different states and different forces involved in all of those states, and then different court cases about them. And I find it really quite confusing, but I feel like if we can untangle it, we'll have a better handle on it. And I want to do a good job with it. So I haven't done that yet. I don't know how many pages of single space notes of stories alone on that. And probably we'll find a court case to hang the whole story on. Lots of people concerned about the fact that a number of the figures in the administration who have been instrumental in those actions against immigrants are moving or have moved onto military bases, and what's going on with that. There's a number of things going on with that, I think. They will tell you they are doing it because they are afraid of the protesters who have called them out around their homes. And so they're saying they're doing this for protection. I'm sure that is something that bothers them, but I will also point out that by taking over this government housing, and it is, it's not the kind of government housing that you and I would go into. These are fairly nice homes. I mean, what's the word? Like really nice homes. They're basically getting government housing for free. And every time the Trump administration does anything, I think you have to start with, are they grifting or not? Is there is there an attempt to get away with some kind of financial advantage here? And I think you've got to factor that in. Nonetheless, it doesn't look good, no matter how you slice it, for leaders of a democracy to have chosen to live inside military compounds. And that's, I don't think they care about those optics. Maybe that's why they did it. Maybe they did it because it's cheap housing. Who knows why? But it is a very much a breach of our norms. And that's the best I can do for you on that. Interestingly enough, a little bit of an aside here, you may or may not know that the vice president lives inside the Naval Observatory. And that's a slightly different thing, although obviously the vice president needs more protection than say, the head of the White House Deputy Chief of Staff. But that actually happened, and I won't go into the whole story, but that happened in part because they simply couldn't get, the government simply couldn't get its act together to finish a decent house for the vice president. So the vice president is also behind gates in what is the Naval Observatory, but it's a little bit of a different story there. All right, another question. Lots of questions about the fact that Trump has destroyed the East Wing of the White House to build a bunker under it. First of all, there is a bunker, or was a bunker. There is probably still a bunker, but under what was the East Wing of the White House that is no longer. And before we go any further down that road, one of the things that is really jumping out to me is how many stories of the ballroom that Trump is talking about are writing as if the ballroom has already been built. They're talking about he has this ballroom, he's his ballroom, the ballroom being built, and so on. Do you see any evidence of a ballroom being built? One of the things that it's going to be really important, and I think is always important actually, but it's certainly really important for this administration, is stop assuming that what they say is actually going to happen. Maybe that ballroom's going to get built. Maybe that ballroom's not going to get built. But right now, there ain't nothing there but air, right? So what does it look like? What would it look like to tear all that out and build a bunker there? I mean, there already is a bunker, but to expand it and turn it, I mean, there's this whole idea there's going to be something big and giant down there and all that. How are you going to do that we don't all watch it? I mean, maybe there's a way. I'm not a contractor, but think about who the people are we're talking about. Think about how the tearing down of the East Wing happened. That is, the Trump or Trump himself is infamous for finding ways to grab as much money as he can. And he demolished the East Wing of the White House with no warning 2 days after the No Kings rally made it clear how deeply unpopular he is. It certainly looked like he was just lashing out. He was mad. The American people had hurt him. He was going to hurt the American people. So right before winter, without any real plans in place to build or do anything else, he tore down the East Wing of the White House. Just had somebody go in and tear that sucker down, bulldoze it. Think about your own home. Like if you were going to tear half your house and build a new piece of it, wouldn't you have a plan in place before you did that? Especially if you were going to do it before winter. Then think about the way he's talking about rebuilding it. What he is doing is there are people across the United States, as far as I know, maybe it's global, who have issues before the US government that they are eager to have Trump's goodwill on, whether it's mergers, whether it's acquisitions, whether it's they want pardons, whether it's you name whatever they want, new laws. They're the ones who are putting money behind this new alleged ballroom. And the money, by all accounts, is pouring in, like way more than one would need to build a ballroom. And what do you think is going to happen to that money? I mean, I just, before we go all, they're going to build this great thing, they're doing it. I'm thinking Trump's 79 years old. He's losing it. I think he's going to pocket the money myself. I mean, maybe they'll throw something else up, but I don't think he is planning for a retirement underground at the White House. I just don't. I mean, I could absolutely be wrong, but before you worry to, borrow too much trouble on that, I think if past patterns hold, we are more likely to see something slapped together or nothing at all, with him walking off with all the hundreds of millions of dollars that people have put in for the project. That would be my guess. So before you worry too much about, Trump hunkering down in the bunker, which, by the way, is not a good sign. If you're living in a bunker, that's a bad thing. I'm sorry, I'm thinking of all the types of housing, underground housing, that actually are good, but that's not the point here. Before you worry too much about what that bunker means, let's wait and see if a stick even goes up on that ground. And if it does, then we can start to worry about what comes next. But right now, I'm more worried about the money that's pouring into some fund to rebuild a part of the people's house. I mean, you're not supposed to tear apart the White House. And you're certainly not supposed to rebuild it with a hand-picked or a hand-packed commission saying you can do whatever you want that is funded by private entities. I mean, it's a non-starter from word go. So before you worry too much about that, I would do that. Now let me get into the other stuff that you asked about, but let me see if I can put it together for you. So stop for a minute. With all the stuff that's going on, everybody's worried, and every day you wake up and it's more stuff coming at you, and it's very hard to make sense of it. Because one of the things that I find anyway is that many different groups across the political spectrum are using the same words, but they're using them differently. So until you really dig into it, it's really difficult to figure out even where the ground is. So I find anyway, and maybe you feel the same way, that more and more and more stuff is coming at us, and it gets harder and harder and harder to untangle it. So, for example, I haven't written about ICE because, and what they're doing, because there are so many different stories but it's not always ICE. Sometimes it's different entities, and they're in different places. And anyway, there's a lot of stuff coming at us. So just stop for a minute and take a breath and think about what has happened today. How people are reacting to things today. If you've been reading the news today, which, maybe that's why you're here, you didn't want to read the news, you wanted me to read the news. One of the things that I always look for is not what people are doing necessarily, it's how people are reacting to that. I'm always kind of looking for the space around, what I call the space around the elephant. So one of the things that has totally jumped out today is that President Donald Trump is freaking out. He's been madly posting all day, and the stuff he has been posting has been wild. That's not a man in control of a situation. That is a man who is losing control of a situation or has lost it. So what does that look like? So first of all, let's go back before we even talk about what's happening today with the elections. Let's go back to the government shutdown, which began on October 1st of this year. Because that shutdown, which is still dragging on as of today, it is the ties for the longest shutdown in American history, the 35 days. The other one was in Trump's first term. And it doesn't show any signs of stopping. Now, we know that Trump went into the shutdown pretty much on purpose. He expected that the Democrats would hold out no more than 10 days. So what happened was he and House Speaker Mike Johnson, who's a Republican from Louisiana, got the House of Representatives, which has a majority of Republicans, to pass what they called a clean continuing resolution to fund the government through November 21st. And somebody asked what that means to have a clean resolution. All it meant was that there was very little, there was actually some other stuff in it, but very little else in it than simply saying, we're going to keep funding the government at the levels that we have done until now, until November 21st, and then we're going to revisit the 12 appropriations bills that we haven't been able to pass. They jammed it through the House of Representatives on September 19th, and then the House and the Senate both were going on a week-long break, and then they were supposed to come back for 2 days before the end of September. So they were supposed to be back on the 29th and the 30th, on Monday and a Tuesday. But Johnson told them all to stay home because he wanted to force the Senate to pass that continuing resolution without any changes to it. And the reason for that was because the Democrats said, they're not a majority party. They have a minority in the House and a minority in the Senate. And they said, we can't pass this because if we don't do something, and remember, this is September, if we don't do something about the what's going to happen to healthcare costs, we're going to really take a massive hit. The American people are going to take a massive hit on their healthcare insurance. A lot of people are going to lose healthcare insurance, and a lot of people are not going to be able to pay what they've got. They're going to end up, the premiums are going to go through the roof. Because in July, when the Republicans passed a budget reconciliation bill. Now, remember, if you listen to me, I talk a lot about the fact there's a very few kinds of bills that cannot be filibustered in the Senate. And mind you, the filibuster and the use of the filibuster, the way it is being used, is really, really recent. It's really Mitch McConnell, the senator from Kentucky, the Republican senator from Kentucky, who really weaponized the filibuster starting in 2009. This is really new, this idea that they filibuster everything. And so they recognized that there had to be some limits to the filibuster. And there's a few of them, judges especially, but then there are a few financial bills that cannot be filibustered. One of them is a budget reconciliation bill. So what Trump and the Republicans did is they threw everything into that budget reconciliation bill. It was the kitchen sink. They threw everything they wanted into that budget reconciliation bill. And Trump recently said, hey, we really don't need Congress anymore because we got everything we wanted for the next 4 years in that budget reconciliation bill. Big extensions of the tax cuts for the wealthy and corporations, lots of deregulation, all kinds of stuff in that tax bill. in that budget reconciliation bill, including dramatic cuts to SNAP, supplemental nutrition assistance programs, including dramatic cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, which will also end up cutting Medicare as well, cuts to heating assistance, all kinds of stuff are in that budget reconciliation bill. But what the Republicans didn't do in that budget reconciliation bill is they did not extend, the same way they extended the tax cuts, they didn't extend the tax credits for premium tax credits for getting healthcare insurance on the Affordable Care Act marketplace. So lots of people have been using these tax credits, essentially subsidies, to be able to afford to buy insurance on the Affordable Care Act markets. With those going away at the end of this year, the cost of premiums is going to go through the roof. A lot of people will drop out of the markets altogether. The healthier people will drop out, meaning that the base for everybody else is going to go even higher. And those bills are now hitting people's tables. You might have seen them, and people are just, they're doubling. I think the average is 114% increase, which is more than doubling. But some are off the charts high. And the Democrats said, we cannot sign off on this because it's going to destroy the Affordable Care Act, and it's going to destroy people's health care. Now, the Trump simply said, you got to do this. I said, so you got to do this. And this is just such a fascinating window into what he's trying to do here, because do you know what percentage of Americans wants those credits extended? 78%. 78% of Americans want those credits extended. And he's saying, no, we're not going to do it. We're going to do it my way. We're not going to do it. But he thought the Democrats would cave within 10 days, is the reporting that came out last Friday. And obviously they didn't. So he's been ratcheting up the pressure, trying to insist this is the Democrats' fault. It's the Democrats, everything is their fault. This is the Democrats, and so on and so on. Well, the problem is the 78% of Americans like what the Democrats are demanding. And so they are blaming the Republicans more than the Democrats for this shutdown. And so Trump has been trying to ratchet up the pain more and more and more. And one of the things he did is he said, despite the fact there was this reserve pot of money that the Congress put in place to fund the Supplemental Nutrition Act, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Programs benefits, the SNAP benefits, EBT cards, used to be a long time ago known as food stamps. I'd love to put that behind us, that term behind us. Despite the fact that there is this reserve, and that his own administration said they were going to use the reserve the same way everybody has before during shutdowns to fund SNAP. In the middle of October, he said, no, we're not going to do that. We don't think it's legal for us to do that. We're not going to do that. So then there's this panic because 42 million Americans who depend on SNAP aren't going to be able to get their SNAP benefits. So what happened then was that on Friday, two federal judges said, hey, that's probably illegal what you're doing. But one of those two federal judges, a guy named John McConnell from Rhode Island, said, you must do this. You have to use that fund. Plus, there's another $23 billion fund you can also tap into to fund SNAP. But at the very least, you have to fund that reserve. And so the administration said, well, we think it's illegal. So you got to tell us how to do it. And to his credit, McConnell came back the next morning and said, here's exactly how you're going to do it. You need to do this. You need to do this. Here's how you're going to do it. And you should also consider tapping into this other pot. And on Monday, which was yesterday, the Trump administration said, we're not going to tap the other pot, but we will do what you say. We'll go ahead and we'll fund about half of SNAP benefits for the month of November. But it's going to take weeks at least, and maybe months because of the paperwork, because we're going to have to do all these new calculations. And which is really pretty obviously, you all know people like this, right? This is, yeah, I'm obeying, but in fact, they're basically saying, yeah, we're following the law, but it's going to take weeks and weeks, which means that people on SNAP still are not going to get those benefits. So Nonetheless, you've also seen Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy saying it's all the Democrats' fault, but I'm going to have to ground some planes because the air traffic controllers are not showing up to work because they're not getting paid. And the Republicans have refused to put forward any short-term bills to fund federal employees or SNAP, which the Democrats want to do, and they don't want to have any part of that because they're trying to ratchet up this pressure. Well, going back to what happened today, Trump today, first thing in the morning, said, I'm not going to fund SNAP until the Democrats reopen the government, basically saying, I'm going to ignore the courts. And within a few hours, the White House is out there going, no, we're doing what we said. We're going to fund these things. It's just going to take weeks. And you can see this real anger and frustration on his part. But then you also saw something else interesting today. And that was Trump in the middle of the day had this post where he said the California election, and this is not a direct quote, but the California election is rigged, and we're going to look into this and so on. Well, this is really interesting in a number of different ways, because what's happening in the California election, there are elections all over the country today. It's an election day. And the California election has a number of different pieces of it, but what he was referencing was Proposition 50. Proposition 50 is a retaliation for Texas doing a really rare mid-cycle redistricting of the state of Texas to create more Republican districts, to send more Republicans to the House of Representatives, because Trump is very concerned clearly about the 2026 elections. So when Texas did that, which is really bonkers, right? Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, said, hey, listen, two can play at that game. And so California has been districted by a commission, but Newsom went in, the Democrats went in front of voters and said, listen, we don't want to change this. The Democrats as an entire national party would like to get rid of partisan gerrymandering altogether. It's a stupid system. We want to get rid of it. But if they're going to do this, we've got to fight fire with fire. So they proposed redistricting California to create 5 more Democratic-dominated districts, which would wipe out 5 of the Republicans in the House of Representatives from California. Only temporarily. It's not a permanent thing like Texas is designed to be. It expires in 2030, right before the next redistricting with the census, because they're saying, honestly, we're not trying to do this full time. This is what we're trying to do. It appeared before the election like that was going to win. Who knows? We don't know, because the elections aren't going to be over there for hours. But Trump was so worried about it. He went on social media and announced, and I forget about what time it was today. I want to say it was noonish, but I don't remember off the top of my head, which is like 9 o'clock in California. And said that these were rigged and we're going to see about this. And then Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, said, yeah, the elections in California are rigged. It's a fact. It's not a fact. There's no evidence of this. They're making this up. And I've talked forever about the history of the right wing saying that voters that any election they lose is rigged. That actually comes from the 1990s. And, it's been a thing for 2 generations. And there's no evidence for it. As I keep saying, voter fraud is extraordinarily rare. Election fraud, in which the Republicans say we got to throw out all these votes, is becoming increasingly common with every election in this moment. So he said that, and I think this is really worth watching, because my guess is he is trying to set up the idea that the redistricting of California, if in fact voters choose that, was fraudulent, and setting up the idea of not seating representatives from California. And I'm really concerned about this going forward, because, you sit there and you say, it's not possible. They couldn't do that. There's a law against that, as there has been since I think it was 1969. If a representative is qualified, they have to be seated. But if the government says it was an illegitimate election, it's a different kettle of fish. That's exactly what he tried to do in the 2020 election, is to say that a number of the election districts in Georgia were fraudulent. They were not. There was never evidence of this. It went to court again and again and again. But that was what the people working with him tried to argue for throwing out votes for President Joe Biden in the 2020 election. So I think this is worth watching, because I think that this is what he is trying to set up. And I will also point out that Adelita Grijalva of Arizona was elected on September 23rd. She is not seated in Congress yet, and they could do it. The Congress is technically in session. They're in pro forma sessions. He could swear her anytime. He's refusing to do so. Why is he refusing to do so? Because she says she's going to be the final vote on, not the vote, the final signature on the discharge petition that will require the House to vote on the release of the Epstein files. And, it's pretty likely that a number of Republicans, if forced to vote on it, are going to vote yes, because their constituents are really beating the drum on that. Once again, I believe it's close to 80% of Americans want those files out there, with, of course, the survivors' information redacted. So I think that's really worth watching. So we're here in this moment, and that sense of panic with the president is palpable. I've talked a lot about how he's mentally not okay, but let's push that a little bit further. These Epstein files are out there, and we're seeing more and more in the news, not just of the sexual assault of children by privileged men, but also of the money involved. Lots of billions of dollars involved. And here's the thing. That money is going to have left a record. It's going to have left trails. And there are already lawsuits and real attempts to get access to information about where that money was going and who was paying that money. That's getting hotter, even though it's not really making the news as much as some of the other stuff is. But there's also something else going on the radical right that I think is so interesting. And that's that the MAGA Republicans are in the middle of a vicious fight. And it's one that's been coming for 50 years. And that is the last 2 weeks ago now, Tucker Carlson, you probably remember from the Fox News channel, a right-wing webcaster now, who has always shown a very close affinity for Viktor Orban in Hungary and also for Vladimir Putin in Russia, gave an interview of more than 2 hours to a man named Nick Fuentes. Fuentes was a right-winger who spent a little bit of time at Boston University and then got kicked out of sort of the more establishment figure based party events because he showed up at the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia in August of 2017, where they shouted really anti-Semitic and racist, sort of Nazi adjacent and sometimes straight Nazi slogans. They were called the alt-right then and neo-Nazis. He went off and began having his own webcast and started to pull together a bunch of people who became known as Groypers. And they attacked the establishment from the right. And he has admired Hitler. He has denied the Holocaust. He is virulently anti-Semitic and racist and sexist. I mean, he's the whole kettle, right? And they've really been trying to keep him aside. And one of the things that he did when Charlie Kirk was alive. And Charlie Kirk was the guy who started Turning Point USA, which was a right-wing organization for college students, but was much more establishment. He attacked Kirk constantly, partly for attention, but partly from the right. And he, when Kirk was killed, it wasn't really clear who was going to pick up Kirk's followers. And what appears to be happening is that Fuentes has started to pick up that right-wing youth movement. And Tucker Carlson appears to have seen that and decided he was going to get in on that. And he platformed Fuentes. Fuentes is now in a big story in the New York Times. But here's the issue. Fuentes is openly embracing Adolf Hitler, Nazi imagery, the whole thing. And at the same time, you're starting to see the sort of open embrace of Hitler and Nazi imagery and Nazi language in younger Republicans. Remember last month, I think it was, the young Republicans from 4 states, works, their chat was exposed, and it was really horrific stuff, including admiration for Hitler and jokes about gas chambers and things, all that. Anyway, when all this came out, the leader of the Federalist Society, which was always sort of the heart of movement conservatism in the 1980s, sort of defended this whole Tucker Carlson for doing this. And he too, his name is Kevin Roberts, he's the key guy behind Project 2025, and he's a real admirer of Viktor Orban as well. So when that happened, a lot of sort of more establishment Republicans who had put up with the rise of this far right and with Trump as a leader of this far right looked at this and they're like, we can't go full Nazi. We just can't go full Nazi. So they started turning on that group of people who were starting to form around or starting to slide even further right toward the Groypers. And they're saying, we can't go there. That included Mitch McConnell, for example, who's 83 years old and is going to be leaving the Senate in 2027. And a lot of those people who were willing to go along with Trump and the Groypers and everybody else, so long as it meant they could stay in power, and are now recognizing they have lost control of the movement. It's going all this way to the alt-right, to the neo-Nazis, to the anti-Semites, to the whole thing. They're what's going on now. This is really an interesting moment because what this is doing is it is forcing people to choose. And this brings me to the last question that you asked, and that was about Marjorie Taylor Greene. Marjorie Taylor Greene is a representative from Georgia. You know her as a real flamethrower. She was fervently MAGA, you name it, she's there. She was one of the people who didn't believe Sandy Hook happened. She used to attack David Hogg, when he was just a kid for, being a crisis actor, all this kind of stuff. But she has a very keen vision for where things are going. And as I say, they're really unsettled. They're unsettled in both parties. But right now, the real focus, of me today, although I'm happy to talk about the Democrats as well, the real focus here is on the Republicans. And by the way, that interest is not because I'm not interested in the Democrats, but right now the Republicans is where the power is. And Marjorie Taylor Greene has been fascinating because she is not backing away from MAGA. What she's doing is she is giving MAGA an off-ramp by today, for example, appearing on The View, which is a TV show that is a very highly watched TV show that is a talk show of women, older women, and saying that they asked her about her views about QAnon, which is also one of the ways she came to power, and if she had changed, because she said she doesn't believe that stuff anymore. And she said, no, I haven't changed at all. I was just misled by social media and the stuff I read online, just like you have been. Fascinating, because that's an off-ramp. That says, no, I wasn't an idiot. I just read the wrong stuff, which honestly on social media, it's easy to do. She's also embracing really popular stuff. As I say, the release of the Epstein files is really popular. Like Republicans and Democrats both want that. You know what else both Republicans and Democrats want? Healthcare. You know, she's picking up on these issues. At the same time, and I will nod here to the Democrats, younger Democrats are doing the same thing. And I'm looking at this, and I mean, I don't know. I cannot predict the future. But the unsettlement, that's not a word, the choppiness of politics in this moment is one in which definitely things are falling apart. How they get put back together remains entirely unclear. Yeah, maybe the neo-Nazis will win. But maybe enough Americans will say, no, I don't want to be part of a neo-Nazi movement, as they have always done in the past, by the way. And they would rather create a government that actually answers the things that we say we want. Remember, I keep saying to you, articulate what we want, articulate what we want. This is why. Because people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, and by the way, I am not at all advocating everybody forget her past or anything else, but watch what these people who want to be reelected do. What you are not seeing from her is her throwing her arms around Donald Trump and saying, I'm your girl. That is over. You're seeing that from Mike Johnson, but you're not seeing it from her. And watching the way people are behaving in this moment is instructive about where they are guessing the country is going. Trump is panicked. He's madly tweeting. Mind you, he's stressed. And well, I'm not even going to go into that interview with CBS, but you're not seeing that kind of panic from the Democrats, and you're not seeing that kind of panic, political panic. I mean, they're very concerned about their constituents, but you're not seeing that kind of panic from people like Mamdani in New York, or Gavin Newsom in California, or J.B. Pritzker in Illinois, who's frantic about what's happening in his city. But you're not seeing that sort of mad clawing that you saw with whichever Cuomo it is running for office in New York, where he's throwing everything at the wall, trying to say, if you don't elect me, the whole world's going to fall apart. Just the way Trump is saying similarly, elect Mamdani and the whole world is going to end. I'm never going to give any money to New York. Of course he can't do that. That's totally illegal. He'll try it anyway. It'll be challenged in the courts. But in this moment, before you worry about all the noise, look at who's panicking and who is not. And that's not any predictions about what's going to happen. And I'm not at all saying we shouldn't be very concerned. Things are terrible, and we should be concerned about our neighbors who do not have food. We should be concerned about our neighbors who do not have heat, which is also in trouble. We should be concerned about our neighbors who are being picked up by ICE and disappeared. I mean, things are not good. I'm not saying, you shouldn't be worried about all that stuff. But there does seem to be a pattern emerging that maybe belies all the other stuff I just said. So if you're totally stressed out and you just can't deal with any stuff, sometimes take a step back and think, who's panicking? And what are they panicking about? And how does that sound? And somebody, I just saw somebody say, well, he's been rage tweeting forever. It doesn't feel like rage tweeting. It feels like fear tweeting. Who knows? Could be wrong. Anyway, sorry I started late. Once again, I'm going to leave you where I always leave you. I don't know how these elections are going to come out tonight at all. But I will tell you this. Even if the Democrats lose across the board, the momentum of people pushing back against this administration is mounting. Every day it's mounting. Trump's popularity is the lowest it's ever been in both terms. He knows it. Things are only getting worse in terms of the way people are reacting to the Republicans during the shutdown. The The pressure is continuing in any number of these places. What we need to do right now is look out for each other, keep the pressure on, and keep the faith. This country's been through hard times before, and as I say, the unsettlement, that's not a word. It's not really like chaos, though. It's the underpinnings, when you're out on the kayak and there's a bad backwash from the ledges, the water is unsettled. It's not that it's rough, it's just unsettled. And that's what it feels like to me now. And what that means is that, there's about to be a movement in one direction or another. And boy, that's sure what it feels like to me right now. Anyway, so do keep the faith, and we'll watch and see what happens tonight in the elections. And then, you know what? Regardless of how they come out, we'll get up tomorrow and work harder, because even if we get this country back on the right track, one of the things about people recognizing how many things can be damaged by one man is the ability to say, we got to fix some stuff. We got to fix the fact that, places like Walmart and Amazon are employing people who need SNAP to live. That's not okay. People shouldn't be working. I don't think it's okay. People shouldn't be working full time and not be able to afford food for their children. They should be able to afford housing. I mean, this is the richest country in the world. It is insane what we have allowed to happen to our society. And that's the final point here for me today. This is not the government funding stuff. This is not the White House deciding where it's going to use its money. It's our money. This is our country. Those are our tax dollars. We are the ones going to be paying for the bills we're racking up. We should be the ones who get to decide how our money is spent, and we're the ones who get to decide who writes the laws. And you shouldn't have an option of following those laws or not, which is what this administration has been trying to do. So anyway, keep the faith, and we'll get up tomorrow and we will do it all over again. And we will keep doing it until we get to a place where we can take a deep breath and recognize that we have made the world a little bit better than it was yesterday. All right, I'm going to go have some supper. Oh, one last thing, by the way. I'm sorry. When I left you on Thursday, I said I would see you on Saturday. I got whacked with a virus and I was flat in my bed for 48 hours. Joanne and I were supposed to talk Saturday morning. She was sick too, although she probably could have done it, she said. She did post for both of us, but I don't think people saw that I wasn't going to be able to make it. And I'm sorry, I should have gotten up and gone to Facebook and told you so. That's really rare. I'm not usually flattened like that. And normally, I try and power it out, but neither one of us really felt like we were going to bring our A game. So I shouldn't have said I was going to do it and then not shown, but it came out of nowhere. So again, I expect to see you Thursday for Politics Chat, but I'm also doing what I expect to be an interesting interview tomorrow, I think, with Ro Khanna. And I've got, if you're looking at my stuff, I've got I've got an interview coming up with Sarah Botstein and Ken Burns, who have done this new American Revolution video, but we got them to give us clips of it, so you could ask questions that I could then ask him, because I don't want to ask all the same questions everybody else asks. I thought it might be fun to shake it up a little bit. So anyway, take a look at those, and I'll see